So when we talk about the incarnation, the first thing that comes to mind is like, how does this giant God, who is in all places, in all times, omnipotent, omnipresent, all this omni stuff, how does he become a three-dimensional creature like us? And I thought it would be fun to do a little experiment, and so I thought, well, it would be like as if I took my face and put it in a scanner, and I tried to become a two-dimensional creature. So I had some just fun little images here. I don't know if you guys can see them. Can you tilt it a little bit? Is that good? Yeah.
I can see your ear.
Yeah, it's meant to be kind of, it's a little bit strange. What is it you say? I don't know what it is.
Water crashing onto our face.
No, it's not water.
Is that a supernova?
It's my face, you know. But you can see, like, you wouldn't know it would be my face. You'd be like, oh, this is what I would think.
Oh, now I start to see it.
When I would think, like, hey, what is it like for the God of the universe to incarnate? You know, how much of him do we really get?
Good point.
And here's another picture. But
Oh, jeez.
this is my face and skin. These are my eyes. I don't know if you can tell that.
Oh, yeah.
And then here's another one.
Oh, yeah.
Turn it this way.
Oh, sure. We've got some squish face there and some breath.
This is a good point.
And I just thought that would
It's
be
like
fun.
smashing your face on a printer.
Yeah, it's exactly what I did.
Push the button.
And then, you know, one thing I love, I don't know if you guys are familiar with the Shroud of Turin. I love the Shroud of Turin. This is the Shroud, and this is like a 3D image of it. And it's this hugely controversial thing, but it's this really interesting relic, because whether or not it's real, the fascination over the relic can be explained really by the fact that you know, that people are just so incredibly fascinated by an object that could have potentially touched Jesus, which is who is God. You know, so something that actually is tangible connection to the body or to the presence of God, and probably one of the very few that, or if the only image we have potentially of Jesus. Whether or not it's true that it really is, I think that the interesting thing about it is that, you know, just how people are so obsessed with this relic. So I have some scriptures. Do you guys have your Bibles? Yes. I'm hoping that I have 4 scriptures that I wanted people to read. Yeah.
Mine's in here.
If somebody needs a Bible, I have one.
Oh, now I can turn to the page right and see.
Yeah, you
where
can
we're going.
see they're marked. Okay, so the 4 scriptures, and I have 4 readers. They're kind of long, so it's going to be about 5 minutes of Bible reading. The first one's Deuteronomy 18:15 through 18. It's got the 1 in it.
Got it.
The second one is John 1:1 through 14. Hillary? Yeah. Hebrews 10 through 18. That's a long one too. Hebrews 10. Yeah, Hebrews 2, 10 through 18. Sure, I'll do that. And the last one, John 14:6 through 8.
Okay, so this one's 15 through 18.
Yes.
Sure.
John 14.
6 through 14.
Okay, here's Deuteronomy 18, 15 through 18. The Lord your God will raise up for you a prophet like me from among your brothers. You must listen to him, for this is what you asked of the Lord your God at Horeb on the day of the assembly, when you said, let us not hear the voice of the Lord our God, nor see this great fire anymore, or we will die. The Lord said to me, what they say is good. I will raise up for them a prophet like you from among their brothers. I will put my words in his mouth, and he will tell them everything I command him.
In the beginning was the Word, and the Word was with God, and the Word was God. He was with God in the beginning. Through him all things were made. Without him nothing was made that has been made. In him was life, and that life was the light of all people. The light shines in the darkness, but the darkness has not overcome it. There was a man who came from God. His name was John. He came as a witness to testify concerning that light, so that through him all might believe. He himself was not the light. He came only as a witness to the light. The true light that gives light to everyone was coming into the world. The world was made through him, but, okay, I need to do this again. He was in the world, and though the world was made through him, the world did not recognize him. He came to that which was his own, but his own did not receive him. Yet to all who did receive him, to those who were called by his name, he gave the right to become children of God. Children not born by human decision, nor of a husband's will, but born of God. The Word became flesh and made his dwelling among us. And we have seen his glory, the glory of the one and only Son, who came from the Father, full of grace and truth. I've been trying to memorize that, so that's why I was...
Beautiful.
Nice.
Awesome.
I memorized it a long time ago and I forgot again.
Good job, Miss Kelly.
Thank you.
Good job.
Thank you. Who is the next one?
I have the next one.
John,
Go ahead.
Hebrews, Hebrews 2:10 through 18. In bringing many sons to glory, it was fitting that God, for whom and through whom everything exists, should make the author of their salvation perfect through suffering. Both the one who makes men holy and those who are made holy are of the same family. So Jesus is not ashamed to call them brothers. He says, I will declare your name to my brothers. In the presence of the congregation, I will sing your praises. And again, I will put my trust in him. And again he says, here am I, and the children of God has given me. Since the children have flesh and blood, he too shared in the humanity, so that by his death he might destroy him who holds the power of death, that is, the devil, and flee those who all their lives were held in slavery by their fear of death. For surely it is not angels he helps, but Abraham's descendants. For this reason he had to be made like his brothers in every way, in order that he might become a merciful and faithful high priest in service to God, and that he might make atonement for the sins of the people. Because he himself suffered when he was tempted, he is able to help those who are being tempted.
And then the last one.
like, what other verses again?
14, 6 through 14.
14, 6. John 14, 6 to 14.
Yeah.
Jesus said, I am the road, also the truth, also the life. No one gets to the Father apart from me. If you really knew me, you would know my Father as well. From now on, you do know him. You even see him. Philip said, Master,
Thank you.
show us the Father, then we'll be content. You've been with me all this time, Philip, and you still don't understand? To see me is to see the Father. So how can you ask, where is the Father? Don't you believe that I am in the Father and the Father is in me? The words that I speak to you aren't mere words. I don't just make them up on my own. The Father who resides in me crafts each word into a divine act. Believe me, I am in my Father and my Father is in me. If you can't believe that, believe what you see, these words. The person who trusts me will not only do what I'm doing, but even greater things, because I, on my way to the Father, am giving you the same work to do that I've been doing. You can count on it. From now on, whatever you request along the lines of who I am and what I'm doing, I'll do it. That's how the Father will be seen for who he is in the Son. I mean it. Whatever you request in this way, I'll do.
Thank you, guys. Can you hand me my phone so I know what time it is? Thanks. Great. So, talk about the incarnation, all those scriptures are related to the incarnation, and touch upon them a little bit. Actually, in the Church of England, traditionally, they read 1 John, which is what Hillary had memorized, every year as their Christmas passage. And I thought it was interesting, just the whole idea of how the incarnation relates to Christmas. And speaking of Christmas, I had looked up an incarnation sermon as I was researching the topic from Charles Spurgeon. And he gave this fantastic, it was in the 1800s, he gave this fantastic sermon introduction. And he was talking about, he was basically giving a defense of Protestants being able to celebrate Christmas. And he was saying, well, basically the Puritans didn't celebrate it. Actually, he said they made a parade of doing work on that day because it was of popish origins, and so they didn't want to celebrate it. But he said that he would hope or would wish that there would be 10 or a dozen Christmas days in a year, because he said it was a boon, offering meditation on love and family, and also on the incarnation. And so he kind of started with a defense of even celebrating Christmas at all, but then kind of came to the conclusion as, well, if we think about the incarnation, then it's a good thing. I thought that was kind of a neat little historical thing. So in the idea of the incarnation, I tried to define it, using different sources, and one source was the Holman Illustrated Bible Dictionary, which was a simple definition. I'll give you a few definitions as I go. But it said that Jesus, God incarnate, was one person in two natures, fully divine and fully human. But actually the word incarnation is not a term we see in the Bible. Rather, it's actually a Latin word coming from a theological concept that was hammered out around like 300 AD-ish, 400 AD by the religious councils at Nicaea, Constantinople, Ephesus, and Chalcedon. And as I sort of did some research into the theology surrounding the incarnation, I actually just really very enjoyed it. I just felt like I was swimming in this richness of the scriptures and just the theologians and their thoughts and these concepts and what they gleaned from it. And one of these was Augustine in the book Classic Christianity, written by Odin, I think it was. He referenced Augustine, who said, "Let us grant that God can do something which we confess we cannot fathom. In such matters, the whole explanation of the deed is in the power of the doer." And in this book, this was my favorite little summary of the incarnation was in here, was Knowing God, J.I. Packer. J.I. Packer said, basically, he drew on this concept of that if God can do anything, if it's really about the power of the doer, then what can the incarnation teach us about understanding the gospel and the nature of Jesus? And J.I. Packer expanded on this idea with a thought that just really encouraged my faith. And he wrote, "It's from misbelief, or at least inadequate belief about the incarnation, that difficulties at other points in the gospel story usually spring. But once the incarnation is grasped as a reality, these other difficulties dissolve." In summary, he basically said, if God is the author of life incarnate, what is the challenge of a miraculous birth? If he is the power which binds all things together in the universe, then who could stand in his way to prevent him from binding up the wounds of the sick and healing them? And if he's the very breath of life, what problem would there be for him to raise from the dead? So some of the other things that we might doubt in the gospel story, actually if you meditate on the incarnation and on the doer of these acts, then some of those doubts can sort of melt away. It was really encouraging for me in my faith to kind of meditate on those things. The meditations on the incarnation leave us with a sense of wonder for the divine nature of the incarnate Jesus. But also, you have to think about the other side, too, that's really encouraging and interesting to ponder, which is what about his human nature. I started with the definition of his divine and human nature. Again, in the systematic theology that I was reading, Thomas Odin, he borrowed from the Orthodox Russian catechism to define the incarnation as this. He says, "The Son of God took to himself human flesh without sin, and he was made man without ceasing to be God." And the key word there was he took to himself human flesh. In other words, God was not diminishing himself, rather he was taking human flesh into his divine nature, which was a point that really kind of got me and thinking, and just really my wheels just like spinning and spinning. So what does it mean that he took this flesh into his divine nature? And it's a theological term called assumptio carnis. It made me think of when Phil talks about carnival, like what does it mean, to take on the flesh or take on the carnival in Phil's mission field. But I'll get to the ministry aspect in a minute. But to assume the flesh. And Augustine in City of God, he wrote this incredible tome about just really as a discourse with pagan philosophies of his day, and took this point to argue that God, in taking flesh as part of his perfect divinity, therefore was proving that flesh in and of itself is not essentially sinful. And that was in contradiction to an idea that philosophers treasured and were expounding in that time, that like the flesh is essentially just bad altogether, and you have to sort of supersede it to expand beyond it. Whereas in the Incarnation, we see God taking on flesh and saying, no, the flesh itself is not innately wrong or bad or sinful or corrupt. It's sin that corrupts it. But in Jesus, we have an example of taking on flesh without sin, and that the flesh itself is not corrupt, but actually can be a part of God's divine nature. That was kind of a mind-blowing point. So what are the implications of this? I think the Apostle John summed it up well when he said, and there are also many other things which Jesus did, which if they were written in detail, I suppose that even the world itself would not contain the books that would be written, he said in John 21:25. There's endless implications for the chorus in the song that we sang today. Oh God, you became a man, you took on flesh, you're so beautiful. Today I just want to share a few of those implications that I was just pondering as I was preparing this, that really struck me. I mean, there really are endless implications of what did it mean that God took on flesh. And I'm sure that you all will ponder one today that will pop into your head. For me, a few that I came up with were, I think that far too often when we talk about the Incarnation, the starting point of the Incarnation really is the Virgin Mary saying yes to God, and we kind of ignore that. I had a friend once, and I was sharing the gospel with her, and I'll never forget what she said. Her face was contorted, and she had tears in her eyes as I shared with her. And she said, the very idea that God would have only one child, and it would be a son, is so hurtful that I would never, ever believe in that message. And I was speechless at that time. But looking back, I really wish that I had just asked her one question. And I wish I had said, but what if Mary said no? What if, could there be a possibility that she could have said no? And I think the answer is yes, because God gives us a choice. So in that understanding, we understand that Mary participated in the Incarnation by saying yes. God could have manifested himself without a birth as a man, but he chose to honor both genders by being born as a man through a woman who said yes to him. And so I think that is a really powerful gender equality notion in the Incarnation that struck me. And then also, that brings me to my next point, which is that he was actually born as a baby. Cyril of Jerusalem wrote in his catechism, which I also found in my systematic theology, he said, the teacher of children became himself a child among children. So this is also a really interesting point. So a child among children, what does that mean? We all think about it, we all talk about it, but I sort of did an experiment recently to see, what would it mean to be incarnated? And of course, it's a very minor experiment, in comparison, but it was interesting, and it had a really interesting result. So I conducted an experiment. I joined. Has anyone heard of the World of Warcraft? Mm-hmm. Yes. So the World of Warcraft is an extremely popular online gaming community, which has a global subscription of 12 million people. To give you a sense of perspective how big that is, Wikipedia estimates there are currently about 13.8 million Jewish people in the world today. So it's almost as big as the religion of Judaism at this point.
Wow.
That's how many people are plugged into this.
Jewish World of Warcraft.
How many Jewish
I am not one of those people. I do not play online games.
One does have to wonder.
I know.
And so I got interested in World of Warcraft, and I joined out of curiosity because my brother plays all day. You can ask my mom, she's sitting right here, all day and all night. He plays this game so much, and he is so incredibly good at this game, that he's in charge of a guild. There are guilds, there are groups. They're like, they play together and they do everything together. He's in charge, he's the leader, the founder of a guild with over 400 people in it. And he gets to decide who stays, who goes. You know, he really is in charge of an army. Like he's on his headphones and he talks to them through the game. And everything he's saying, you will have no idea. It's like he's speaking another language. He's like, you know, fetch and do this and do that, and he just tells them what to do and they do it. You know, he's basically a centurion, except he has 400 instead of just 100 under him. So in the gaming world. So I was like, okay, I need to get at my brother. I need to find a way to connect with him in his world. I need to incarnate into the place where he is, and the place where he is in a game world. So I need to create myself in a game world. So I did, and I created this character, and I named her Incarnational, because that's why I created her. And this is the world that she lives in, which is his world. And so I'm there now in his world. And it was incredible when I told him, hey Anthony, I want to play your game. He, all of a sudden, I mean, when I tell you he is so obsessed about his computer, he will not let anybody touch his computer ever, ever. He got up from his chair, he laid on his bed, and he set it up, and he said, okay, play, I want to watch you. Right? Immediately, I had his attention. Immediately. You know, and he sat there, and he watched me play, and he was interested in everything I was doing. And it's amazing because one of the things I learned, this idea of Jesus was when incarnated as a baby, what does that mean? Well, I was fumbling around, I was so embarrassed. I was like, I don't want to play this game, blah, blah, blah. And he's just laughing, and he thinks it's so cute because I'm like a little baby in his game, you know. And in some ways, it just endeared me to him, and it opened up this door in our relationship that wasn't there before. And so I just, you know, I just really pondered this, and I also did a little research, and I went back and watched a few movies, like for example Avatar, which is another great example of this. You know, in the movie, and The Matrix is another one, but in the movie Avatar, he is, you know, in this community, and he's in this other body to incarnate into their world. And at first, he can barely move around, he can barely do anything. He doesn't know how to interact with his body. He's like a baby. And then they take him in, you know, there's a humility that comes in that. And like with Jesus as well, we see that he had to be taken into a family and raised as a baby, as a child. And then to come to really truly understand their world. So those were the dynamics of the human interaction that really meant something to me. And what does that mean to us as Christians in this world? The Bible says that we are to be in the world, but not of it. So what does that mean? That we are in the world, that we are part of this you know, society that we live in, this world. And this is the question that I guess I want to leave you guys with. And this last slide, I loved it. I wanted to find the thing from The Little Mermaid. You know, she's like, part of your world. She's like trying to become part of the world of people with feet. So this is a play on the English, you know, keep calm and carry on slogan from World War II. And it says, keep calm and be part of their world. And so the two questions I want to ask for discussion today are, what does it mean for God to have been part of our world? And what could it look like for us to be part of the world, part of this world, and part of the people's lives that we're around, to be incarnate ministers to them in their lives and in their world?